Campaigning intensifies in the 2018 governor's race, and a prohibition on sexual harassment is now in state law. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. It's not even Thanksgiving and the campaign's underway. Of course, it's been underway for a while. It's the new day of constant. And here to discuss that and other Springfieldian issues, Brian Mackey is back, Illinois Public Radio State House reporter. Welcome back.
Good to be here. I didn't know the campaign ever stopped.
I guess it doesn't anymore, does it? And Dave Dahl is here. He is WTAX radio reporter and anchor in Springfield. Welcome back, Dave.
Hello.
Well, Dave, you were among people, I guess, who went over to see Governor Rauner on one of the stops of his campaign tour this week, which included Decatur. How did he do?
It was the first stop of his campaign that was not a video. And we did get a chance to ask some questions, not all the ones we wanted to ask, but he toured a manufacturer there, a business that makes parts for some of the bigger companies. I want to say Caterpillar and such. And he took the tour and took our questions.
Now, one of the things that I noticed that he had said was he would really like, in addition to things like term limits that he's talked about for a long time, and an end to corruption in government, et cetera. I know Mike Madigan is a problem that he brings about apparently at every place, the House Speaker that has been his nemesis for his time in office and his main target a lot of times. He also says he wants to, over time, roll back the state income tax on individuals to 3%, which it hasn't been in a while. It was 5% when he took office. That was a temporary tax increase that rolled back right at the beginning of 2015 when he came in to 3.75. It's up to 4.95 now, which I know the governor had agreed to that level if he got certain reforms, which he didn't get, so he vetoed that, but he was overridden when the state budget finally went in. Is that realistic, and is he talking about that over what, 2 or 3 or 4 years, or is he even saying that?
I think where you need to go on that is if we have a booming economy, then the factors will be there that will allow this to happen. So it wasn't really a plan or a timeline or a strategy that he laid out point by point. But if Illinois were a better place to do business, if there were more business in Illinois and more money generated, then Illinois would be in position to roll that income tax rate back. And let me back up a little bit. One thing I thought was a little different about what the governor had to say this week than 4 years ago was when someone asks for your vote for the state house or state senate, ask where they are on term limits and ask, in the case of the House, if they support Speaker Madigan. So that's a little different from Madigan's the problem, vote against him, because as we've said many times, unless you're in the 22nd district or whatever,
the House district
near Midway
where
Field,
Madigan is elected from one of the 118.
You will not see Madigan on the ballot. And then once, presuming the Democrats are in the majority, right, then all the Democrats would vote for a speaker.
Yeah. So I have heard just about the 3%. So you're saying he's not pledging it, but he's mentioning 3% would be good. Is that, I guess it's campaign season, because that, if it goes down that far, then you're talking about several $1 billion that would be gone from the state. You'd have to, or if there are so many more jobs and more companies that would come here, you'd get more money, I guess.
Well, I mean, you're talking about trickle-down economics, voodoo economics, pick your term, this idea that if you cut taxes on top earners or businesses, that they're going to reinvest that money. But the evidence is just not there. This has been a point of conservative economic dogma.
Yeah, but I think wasn't Dave saying that what the governor's saying is if our economy was better, we could do this, as opposed to let's do this and
he's
our
not saying do it
better
today.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm saying that even that cutting taxes you will never get. There's never been an example of having enough growth pegged to tax cuts. I mean, this was kind of something that came about in the early Reagan administration, and it's just and it's been a point of conversation and ideas among conservative economic thinkers ever since, but there's no evidence that it actually works that way. So it's a point of dogma, and it's certainly a good campaign point. If you want to vote for somebody who wants to lower your taxes, then Governor Rauner wants to be your man. So,
well, he does. And clearly the person that running against him, who is State Representative Jean Ives of Wheaton, who is very conservative on fiscal as well as social issues, she would like the tax to go down too if it could. Although, Dave, we were at an event in Springfield and she wasn't particularly specific on what to cut, but she said everything, pensions are a big problem. Certainly in the future you have to lower what is going on, what people will get, although I think she knows you can't, under our Constitution, cut back on what people have been promised so far.
Yeah, she didn't mention the Supreme Court. And she did say that we need to get a handle on spending, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the Republican points, a lot of the conservative points. And so she's presenting herself as the one who's really going to be a conservative and really going to be a Republican. And she claims a lot of support. I guess we'll find out March 20th.
Yeah, and I actually interviewed her a couple weeks ago, and I asked her about this tax question, the tax rate. And I thought she gave an interesting, maybe not what you'd expect from a dogmatic conservative answer. She said, the reason you would raise taxes is because it's immoral. That's her word. It's immoral to hold the amount of debt that we have and to owe the kind of money we do. So that is arguably an even more, sort of hardcore fiscal conservative position. And it's one that, you've heard from other people that when she was not one of the Republicans who crossed over to vote to raise income taxes, but some of the ones who did said, it's crazy. We had 16, at the time it was 15, it was recently as high as $16.7 billion to vendors across Illinois and elsewhere in the country who have provided goods and services to the people of the state of Illinois, and Illinois has left them holding the bag.
Right.
So
I remember somebody saying, it's a Republican policy to pay people you owe.
Right. So she actually gave a somewhat more nuanced answer on that question. I thought was interesting.
It is indeed. I also find it interesting, certainly on the Republican side, nationally and in Illinois, the idea that taxes are bad is a good thing, and you want them lower. And yet all of the Democrats running for governor, the major ones, want an income tax, progressive income tax, a graduated income tax like the federal system, where if you are richer, you pay more. You would have a higher level and that would take either some significant dealing with exemptions, but mostly that would probably take a constitutional amendment because the Illinois Constitution demands a flat tax. You only have one rate that you can charge every individual. Isn't that going to be a harder sell for Democrats in 2018 when they say we want a progressive income tax, which they are already saying? Can that be sold as opposed to a message that the Republicans have? Well, they raised our taxes. We didn't want that, even though there were some Republican votes that helped override the governor on that to get a state budget for the first time in a little over 2 years. But isn't that, it's going to be, you're going to have to do a lot of explaining to say why a progressive income tax is good. Obviously, you can say the rich guys should pay.
Yeah, well, and where the rubber meets the road, though, is the numbers, right? What would the numbers be? And because the way some of these taxes have been put out in the past is most people, let's say you make below $100,000, you might actually see a tax cut, because the idea is the people who are the J.B. Pritzker billionaires, the Bruce Rauner 100 millionaires would be seeing their taxes go up. They would pay a higher share. And the people at the lower to middle end of the income spectrum could see a slight reduction. I've been waiting for Democrats. I was trying to call up the poll numbers. I'm not finding them immediately, but it's something that polls pretty well when the Simon poll at Southern Illinois University has asked that question. So I've been sort of waiting for somebody to take this up. But you do have a lot of groups that are allied against it. When there was, I remember there was a push for this a few years ago, and I heard about it from the conservative groups that oppose it before I'd even heard from the sponsors who were pushing it. They had gotten wind of it first and immediately launched a campaign to try and gin up opposition to this. So it would be an uphill climb.
It would have to be by a petition drive. The legislature isn't going to put that on the ballot.
Well, that's an interesting view, no matter who the governor is, according to Dave Dahl. So,
as long as the speaker is in the speaker's office, I understand he's against it.
Well, and we'll see where that goes. What do we think, just in general, of the governor asking, seeking to have all the Democratic candidates across the state asked about Mike Madigan, how toxic is the Madigan name? How toxic has Governor Rauner made it? And can he win more seats in the legislature for Republicans this next time in the middle of kind of what's going on with Donald Trump in the White House and maybe an energized Democratic Party?
Good questions.
And those are things we watch on the
No,
show.
I
as
mean,
we go.
I can talk about it a little bit, but that's the rub, right? How is this election going to be about President Trump, or is it going to be about Speaker Madigan? Those are the two. The Democrats would like this election to be about President Trump. The Republicans would like it to be about Speaker Madigan. Both of them poll very unpopularly across the state. Speaker Madigan, who is from Chicago, and our friend and sometime panelist on this show, Charlie Wheeler, would say that was always one of his main concerns in the legislature, was looking out for Chicago. He came here at the behest of the senior Mayor Daley to look out, to look out for the interests of Chicago, and that's kind of his number one thing. But even he is, I think, underwater in Chicago, where more people disapprove of him than approve of him. And so the governor has been successful at making his name not one that you want to campaign on around here. However, I would say that it's interesting that Republicans are also now being asked, do you support Governor Rauner for re-election? Which is sort of an interesting
And that, of
turnabout.
course, Abs was talking about, abortion and some other issues that Governor Rauner, she said he's like a Chicago Democrat almost.
Like an Ivy League professor.
That's what it was.
It would be a big pickup in a blue state, which has, only had the Republican speaker for a short time over the last decades, in the midterm election where Donald Trump is president. I mean, that's.
You mean the Republican governor?
Well, and seats.
No,
seats in the legislature.
Oh, a Republican speaker.
Yeah,
It'd be a giant pickup, yeah. But can it happen? Because they still
It's a
have
heavy
to
lift.
It's a heavy lift. We'll see where that goes.
And I also say that, the competitive seats, they've picked up seats in the southern Illinois, which is Trump country. And the only places where you're going to find the competitive seats now are in the suburbs. And voters there tend to be a little more across the board on, you might have a social liberal but a fiscal conservative. Does that person go Republican? Do they go Democrat? It might vary from election to election.
A lot of places where the seats are going to be open too. You're not going to have an incumbent.
Yeah.
We will see. Now, I know, Brian, you mentioned Republicans like to talk about Trump. Daniel Biss, who is a state senator from Evanston, a Democrat running for governor himself, he's saying, let's not just elect a rich guy. Look at me. I'm a middle-class person. I was a professor. And he's saying, just like Donald Trump, J.B. Pritzker hasn't released his tax returns, and he should do so. And within a day of putting out a video to this effect, J.B. Pritzker said that by the end of filing period, which I believe December 4th is going to be the last day to file for the March primary, he will release his tax return. So that'll fill a news cycle at some point, because he is on the Forbes list, and Pritzker is worth about $3.5 billion, whereas the governor is only worth about $1 billion.
So the Forbes list says, although we've seen with the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross that can sometimes be pretty far off. So who knows what's in there? I think that that'll be interesting to find out. I hope that Senator Biss's research people get a bonus, because it was pretty clever of them to find that happened to be that Pritzker used the exact same phrasing that Trump had about it being
complicated to put together to release these tax returns.
And I think we know this from the Governor Rauner's tax returns, and he has not released everything that
he releases like 2 pages.
It's a cover sheet,
Right.
the top sheets. It's
How
not
much
the
did you give
full
to-
schedules
that's
that we've gotten from Governor Quinn in the past and
Right.
other candidates in the past. So even the limited disclosures that he makes, as well as his state ethics disclosures that he has to make. Boy, there's a lot of complicated stuff and things that have funny names and seem to be headquartered in offshore places. And it's just, you have to explain a lot when you're that wealthy and have that much money, apparently. Weird to those of us who have, used TurboTax maybe and do more simple taxes.
Well, Dave, President Trump got elected without releasing his returns. Do constituents, do voters care about that stuff? Or does it just pile on?
I'm betting JB hopes they don't.
There you go. Very interesting. Well, and speaking of taxes, let's talk a little national stuff, and it may affect the next election too. Congress, the U.S. House passed a whole tax reform package that was pushed by Republicans with only Republican votes this past week. It no longer includes state and local tax deduction for state and local taxes, except I think the House version has $10,000 that you could claim or deduct from your property taxes, but not like the high Illinois state tax. So how big an issue is this going to be in congressional races, do we think?
Well, one, I guess we have to wait and see if it's actually going to pass and become law.
Because there's a different version in the U.S. Senate.
Right. And I should preface this by saying I am not an expert. To the extent I am any sort of reasonably up on Illinois policy and politics, it's much worse when it comes to Congress. So, and we're not in Washington. But it certainly is it becomes an issue if the other side is successful in pushing it and making it an issue. And to go back to our earlier conversations, if Democrats would rather talk about the latest tweets emanating from the White House, then they'll probably focus on that rather than arcane matters of tax policy. But if it is, on the other hand, if these votes are something that people will actually see negative consequences in their pocketbooks, then maybe it is something that they want to push. We've certainly seen Congressman Rodney Davis, who represents parts of Springfield here and Champaign as well, put out a news release late in the week saying how he had gotten a sort of a handshake deal to work with the head of the Ways and Means Committee on some aspect regarding tuition tax credits or something like that. So it's something that he appears to be cognizant of and wants to appear sensitive toward.
And he's got, the 13th congressional district has like 8 colleges and universities, so they want to make sure tax breaks available to folks there continue to be on the table. So, and I know that the Democratic view is that the Republican tax reform in Washington helps the rich more and won't help the middle class or even hurt, whereas Republicans talk all about it helping the middle class. So, and we'll see where that one goes. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that sexual harassment legislation has now been signed by the governor, as the General Assembly has, like so many people across the country, have been dealing with issues of sexual harassment in the workplace. Dave, I know that the leaders of the legislature have appointed members to task forces, and the task forces are supposed to get to work and make changes to be reported by the end of next year. But also now, with the new law, people can deal with the existing complaints. There's the 1-year limitation is gone on when you can deal with complaints that are in the mill, and there's a new inspector general, at least temporarily, for the legislature.
Yeah, who's going to take care of the 27, not all of which apparently are sexual harassment.
Right.
I don't want to say criticism, but it's pretty clear that the bills that the governor signed aren't all that strong, and they're barely a first step. They passed unanimously, and there was no suspense as to what the governor was going to do with them. So I think, again, we have a situation where clearly the behavior is not going to be tolerated, and there are probably people past and present who are nervous as to whether they'll be the next, just as we go to tape now, Al Franken.
Yeah. Brian, have you noticed any just different atmosphere at the State House since all this stuff started happening? Or will there be?
Well, you hear anecdotally from women saying that they're getting more handshakes instead of hugs or pecks on the cheek, which I'm not a hugger myself, so at least not of strangers, so I've always been one to prefer the handshake. It just seems strange to me that you would do that in a professional setting, but apparently this is something that women have had to deal with for a long time, and worse, much worse. I mean, that's sort of the easy end of the spectrum when it comes to unwanted behavior. So the proof will be in time, right? Is this something that is going to be a national story that is in the news for a few months and then it sort of recedes? But I think to Dave's point, I haven't read the story yet, but I did see the news alert about Senator Al Franken. It seems to be something that's affecting both political parties and more industries. And so it seems like a story that might be with us for a long time.
Al Franken, I guess, was on a USO tour when he was just a comedian and not yet in the U.S. Senate, and was inappropriate, unwanted kiss and some other stuff with, I think, a woman who was also on the USO tour as doing entertainment. So, and there was a picture that was somewhat damning involved in that.
I think he acknowledged
that yes, it's time for all people to change and realize. that things that were offensive shouldn't have happened. Speaking of the whole sexual harassment thing, there's been an interesting issue in one of the central Illinois congressional districts. We mentioned Rodney Davis before, and the 13th congressional district goes to Champaign and Decatur and into Springfield and down southern Illinois, part of it. So there was a House Administration Committee hearing early in the week in which Rodney Davis said, as he was talking to people about how this is being administered, you know, I talked to the women on my staff. My staff is made up mostly of women. They were concerned that this talk of harassment might make some people not hire as many women, and that would be wrong. And someone tweeted out, and it was from HuffPost, which I guess the Huffington Post changed its name, a reporter who was watching this said, Rodney Davis worries that less women could be hired. Then Betsy Dirksen Londrigan, who's one of the 4 Democratic candidates, she's from Springfield running against him, tweeted out, oh, this is terrible, Rodney Davis shouldn't be talking about hiring less women. Then Emily's List, which promotes pro-choice Democratic women and has endorsed Londrigan, similarly said, we must get this buffoon out of Congress because he wants less women, basically. And Rodney Davis is saying, and his people, that's not what I said. The tape shows completely the opposite.
And the reporter was quick to.
And the reporter
clarify,
put out saying, quit messing with what Rodney Davis said because he did not. Oh, everyone chill out on Rep. Rodney Davis. He did not say he will hire fewer women to avoid sexual harassment. He asked how to prevent other offices from doing that. So all the evidence
words. Rodney Davis worries that people are going to hire fewer women, yes. And that's the commercial.
Does this hurt Betsy Londrigan potentially because she hasn't backed down? As I worked on a story on this late in the week, she said, well, he shouldn't even bring up the subject. This is like the Twitter nation where you say one thing, it's partially reported immediately, other people pick up on it, it becomes an issue out and about, and then you have to deny saying something that you intended the opposite anyway. Is that fair? And who does that help and hurt?
Who says what's fair and what's not? Rodney Davis is worried that he and other congresspeople are going to hire fewer women. I said that in 1.5 breaths. It took you a half hour to explain what it was really about.
And well, it is.
I think it would hurt. It would backfire on candidate Londrigan and the Emily's List people if Congressman Davis put some money behind an ad that says "pants on fire" or something like that. I don't know if that's the look he wants to go for. Other Democrats could say, "Well, Congressman Davis is bad for women and bad for Illinois, and his votes show it," and just give them a launching point. I guess it's really up to Congressman Davis whether he wants to fire back at this.
Well, it's also somewhat up to those of us in our business, isn't it, Brian, to say, kind of who's being accurate here, because we do this with political ads all the time and with tweets and everything else now. That
we do, although...
Oh, by the way, one of the things Betsy Londrigan did, she put something on Facebook critical of him, and it was a promoted Facebook post saying, isn't this terrible what Congressman Davis said? So, of course, that feeds into the idea, well, does what you put on Facebook have to be accurate? Again, what's accurate in this case?
Yeah, but I mean, having lived in a competitive district, I can tell you that no amount of fact-checking by you or me or anyone else is going to stop partisans from putting things in mailers if that's what they want to do. So, far less controversial things have been put and used against people. So it's a shame. It doesn't seem like he was saying anything that was, he clearly didn't seem to be trying to suggest that as a possibility. He expressed it as a concern. But this is something where you hear about people, who knows, it could even gain him votes, because on the right there's this concern about political correctness, that men don't want to talk about women's issues, that white people don't want to talk about issues dealing with African Americans because they're afraid that they'll say the wrong thing or make a misstep. I mean, there's a way that, perhaps with some voters it could actually work to his benefit. But yeah, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
It could, only because, he does have a chief of staff who's a woman, and his district director is a woman, and his
communications director
is a woman. And
it's clearly not, he is not a guy who has as far as I know, a reputation for misogyny. He's hired a lot of women to work with him. It just seems like an attack that's not actually rooted in something that's in his character.
Yeah, well, it's a tough life out there in Congress, and you have to be kind of ready to take on anything, and we'll see how it falls. So it's almost Thanksgiving. Given that people live in Illinois, is there anything to be thankful about for people who watch state government these days?
We have a budget?
We have a budget.
Yeah.
And the governor still says there need to be some cuts.
And there are going to be lights on the dome.
And the legislature's going to be out of town for a while, so we are a little safer in that regard.
I'm thankful that there's a lot of lame ducks who maybe will find the political courage to continue to take tough votes to do fiscally responsible things with government. But I'm also, on the other hand, whatever the opposite of thankful is, that a lot of smart, experienced people are leaving the legislature now because of some tough votes they've taken in the past year. So,
and we will see. Looks like a number of primary races. There's how many still? We have eight candidates or so for Democratic Attorney General because Lisa Madigan is leaving. So it will be crazy. Dave, you mentioned the lights on the dome, and in the middle of the early budget impasse, Secretary of State Jesse White had said we can't put the Christmas lights up, and then labor unions came to the aid and paid like the $7,000 electric bill, and then last year and this year they're saying we're paying it. So it's a tradition in Springfield.
Yeah, they look so festive.
Although I got to say the dome is still dark the rest of the year, which is kind of a disappointment. And I did check in with the Secretary of State's office on this a few months ago, and they said, yeah, we haven't really turned it on yet, turned on the lights. I mean, we have a budget. It is kind of a big black hole in the skyline of Springfield at night, the other 11 months of the year.
Well, Brian Mackey and Dave Dahl, thanks for the conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.